This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 421, entitled Masculist Snappers. Description. This flyer proposes a strategy for masculists to become snappers, that is, who snap at monoconscious feminazis, who push their monoconscious feminazi rhetoric, claiming that gender oppression is a one-way street, that only men are gender oppressors. Whereas, as seen by biconscious masculists, it is women who oppress men far worse, with women's decades-lasting manslavery, etc. These masculist snappers can snap at these monoconscious feminists when these women speak to mixed audiences, by haranguing back at them with masculist ideas, masculist rhetoric, so that both the monoconscious feminist and the audience itself learn over time to become biconscious and accept the idea that in reality women oppress men far worse, parasiting off men continuously and for decades, which is a hugely greater gender crime against men than anything that the feminists are complaining about as to how men oppress women. Now the flyer itself. Masculist Snappers by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. A masculist snapper is a masculist who snaps at monoconscious feminazi bitchery, aiming to wipe out monoconscious feminists, converting them into biconscious feminists, or face the overpowering male wrath of the masculists, who will give these women no traditional male chivalry nor deference, since masculist snappers see such women as the ideological enemy to be wiped out. Masculists are usually biconscious, that is, they've had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, so have a basis for comparison as to which sex oppresses more the other sex, to a far greater extent than a monoconscious feminist, who by definition has only had her feminist consciousness raised. So typically has rather feminazi bitchy attitudes towards men, since she has been taught by feminism that gender oppression is a one-way street, perpetrated by men against women. Most feminists know nothing about masculism. Most feminists haven't even heard the term before, and when they do, they usually display an instinctive fear at hearing the term for the first time, thinking that masculism lashes out at women for the ways that women oppress men, in the same way that feminists lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women. There's a lot of truth to this instinctive reaction of monoconscious feminists, since women do oppress men, and badly. But since nearly all feminists are monoconscious, that is, they have only had their feminist consciousness raised, they tend to be rather feminazi bitchy towards men, since they have been brainwashed all their lives, unless they're old, that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, that the gender oppressors are men, and that men oppress women. Feminism is full of such examples of male oppression of women, in brackets, for example, rape, sexual harassment, job discrimination against women, etc. Close brackets. So not surprisingly, monoconscious feminists feel they have the right to be angry at men, and many are, lashing out at men for being the oppressors of women. However, to masculists, who are also biconscious, often having read more feminist books than most feminists, this monoconscious feminazi bitchery is wildly out of place, since for biconscious masculists, women are by far the greater gender oppressors, since women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades. For example, women's financial parasitism of men, women's manslavery, women's fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, women's many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, in brackets, for example, paternity fraud, where in about 5% of pregnancies the husband is not the father. Pill lying, where millions of women lie to their boyfriends/husbands about taking the pill but aren't, get pregnant, then expect him to pay for a kid that he doesn't want, thus manslaving him for decades. Women's tooth and nail opposition and utter hypocrisy against the paternity rejection right, which would allow a man to reject an unwanted pregnancy, so that if the woman goes ahead with it, then she takes full legal and financial responsibility for the kid. Women have the mara, but men don't have the para, which is the greatest form of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women, but against men. When biconscious masculists hear monoconscious feminists lashing out at men for the ways that men oppress women, these masculists lose patience and harangue these monoconscious feminists with real masculist rage, since to such masculists, monoconscious feminazi bitchery is seen as hypocritical, ignorant, in brackets, that is, of masculist ideas, and decidedly callous towards men. So biconscious masculists are now out to crush such monoconscious bitchery by stamping it out wherever and whenever they come across it. Masculists have adopted a policy of being masculist snappers. That is, when they hear some monoconscious feminazi lashing out at men for the ways that men oppress women, then they harangue back at her with masculist rhetoric, masculist ideas, telling her in no uncertain terms that she is an MFB, that's a monoconscious feminazi bigot, and that in reality women oppress men far worse, particularly with women's manslavery, living off the labour and money of a man for decades. To masculists, the manslavery of fluffies is a war issue. Masculists see themselves as the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century abolitionists of the northern states of the US, who went to war in large measure over the moral abomination of Negro slavery. To masculists, fluffies, based on the word fluff, that is, traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man, are vermin, that is, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin, to be wiped out by being totally ignored by masculists, not even pumped and dumped, so that their fluffy parasite genes are removed from the gene pool. Masculists have the same level of hatred against fluffies in the 2000s as abolitionists had for slavers of Negroes in the southern states of the US in the 1800s. Masculists aim to wipe out fluffies by forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at for being decades-long manslavers, for being vermin. Masculists have an even greater hatred against fluffy feminists, who are seen as being arch-hypocrites by the masculists, since these fluffy feminists want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men in sharing the burden of earning a living by not bothering to fip up, that is, to become a fip as an adult, that is, she doesn't bother to get a career-competent education at high school and college so that she can be a true fip as an adult, pulling her own financial weight and not expecting, fluffy style, to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him for decades. To masculists, fluffydom is manslavery, and manslavery is slavery, and slavery is hated. So the masculists have a hatred of fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrites, aiming to wipe them out by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that their fluffy parasite genes are removed from the gene pool, effectively exterminating them slowly. One concrete and very effective way to do this is to pursue a masculist snapper policy. That is, whenever masculists are in an audience of a public talk given by a monoconscious feminist who starts lashing out at men for the ways that men oppress women, then the masculists stand up and gender politically harangue her back, but with greater male venom, telling this monoconscious feminazi that women are by far the greater gender oppressor, saying such things as, quote, "Go fuck yourself. You hated MFB, that is, monoconscious feminazi bigot. You know fuck all about masculism. To you, in all your gender political ignorance, gender oppression is a one-way street. That is, that there's only one gender who are oppressors, that is, men who oppress women. If you had bothered to study some masculist ideas, you would know that in reality, women oppress men far worse, since women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades. 80% of young women at the critical age of 16 in high school choose to become what the masculists call fluffy crappers, choosing to study fluffy crap majors, that is, the intellectually easy, intellectually lazy, memory-based subjects that the economy does not value. These fluffy crappers then study more fluffy crap majors at university because they are excluded from entering the STEM fields, that's science, tech, engineering, math, and the professions because they don't have the math and science prerequisites from high school. These fluffy crappers then get a fluffy crap diploma, earn poor money, screw around in her 20s with some 40 different penises in her, stats show, by the time she's in her 30s, then starts listening obsessively to her biological clock ticking hard, so realises she can't afford to buy a middle-class house with her fluffy crap salary, so goes looking around for some gullible, ignorant, stupid manslave to work for her, bribing him with a bit of sex once in a blue moon. A decade later, she will be bored with her 41st penis husband, so will take him to a fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court and financially massacre him, ripping his kids away from him with a 90% probability, getting his house so she can raise her kids in it, forcing him to make child payments to kids he will barely see, losing half his stuff and wealth to her. And if she's a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no legal nor moral obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up, so that she continues to parasite off his money after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. This is the end of part 1.